Look, okay, I get it. There's a lot of hype around new Sony cameras, especially looking at the new A9 III that was just launched earlier this week. There's a lot of features packed into that camera, and although it's mainly a sports photography and animal photography camera, that thing looks really good for video with the global shutter. And I am so excited for the future of Sony mirrorless cameras. But the newest of the new isn't what we're here to talk about today. Today we are talking about this guy, which is my Sony a7S III camera, and why it may be 3 years old, but it's still hanging with the best of the best. I fully believe that purchasing this camera in 2023 and 2024 is still a solid move, and I'm here to tell you exactly why. So what's up everybody, my name is Ross Barnett, and for the last 7 years I've been a full-time videographer focusing on live events, and a good bit of those live events have been weddings. The company I started with a good friend of mine, Two Fly Guys Media, films about 60 to 70 weddings a year, and the last 3 years of films have all been filmed on this camera, the Sony a7S III. And I'm confidently here to say that I do not plan on upgrading this camera anytime soon, and I am more than confident that it will carry our business through 2024. So if you're interested in learning all about why I'm in love with this camera, stick around to find out. All right, so let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the lifespan of the A7S line. Something to think about before buying any camera is how long will this technology last before I want something new? And that sometimes depends on the person. And well, if it's always changing and you're never quite satisfied, then maybe that might be a personal problem. But let's look back on the history of the A7S for a second. The A7S II camera was a game changer for its time, and it was released in October of 2015. At that time, it held its weight against the competition and was able to do so for so long. Now, I do agree that there were some dry years between 2019 and 2020 where Sony seemed like it was falling behind with the competition who were releasing all of the higher spec cameras. For those of you who don't know, those were the days where everyone was switching from 8-bit to 10-bit. And they finally did it. The a7S III wasn't announced until October of 2020, 5 years after the a7S II. Now, in the wonder world we live in, where car manufacturers release a new model every year, where there's new iPhone every October, it can seem like 5 years is far too long for a camera manufacturer to release a new camera. And it can seem like 5 years is far too long for a consumer to have to wait on the new technology. However, what this does is ensure that your camera will last the times. If we use the past to predict the future, that means we probably won't see another a7S IV or equivalent camera regardless of what it's called. Its successor won't be released until October of 2025. That's still 2 years from now. So essentially what I'm saying from this section is I don't think you'll buy an a7S III now and immediately regret it because there'll be an a7S IV released just next week. It's probably just not going to happen. And while we're talking about it, the same with the FX3. These two cameras are super similar, and the FX3 isn't getting an FX3 Mark II anytime soon. It's just not how Sony rolls. And up next, let's talk about the price. Scrolling through eBay right now, you can get a used Sony a7S III for right around $2,500. And when purchasing new, you can get it for $3,500. However, I wouldn't recommend purchasing a 3-year-old camera brand new. There are plenty of used options on the market out there that will save you $1,000. Anyway, for $2,500, there isn't a better camera on the market. And I always get in trouble for making statements like that on this channel, but I actually believe that because I know this camera like the back of my hand. There isn't a better workhorse of a camera that can excel in low light situations like the a7S can. All right, so let's talk about the image quality. The 10-bit 422 4K image out of this camera just looks fantastic. There have been so many instances where I've loved the image out of this camera, and the more I learn about lighting and framing, the image just gets better and better. There's nothing in 2023 out right now that I've seen out of any other camera manufacturer's image that has made me want to jump ship. I can look around at all the other cameras and still know that I have the best of the best image out of this camera. And that's something pretty cool for a 3-year-old camera. Something a lot of people compare the a7S III to is the Sony a7 IV. And honestly, I own an a7 IV and I don't love it. Actually, I'm shooting this right now on the a7 IV, but when it comes to video, specifically with the a7 IV's crop and slow motion and the native ISO at 2500 instead of 12,800, I'd almost always have the a7S when shooting video. Specifically, I bought the A7 IV as a C camera back in 2022, and it was quickly replaced with the FX30 in our lineup. So now my poor A7 IV has been demoted to the YouTube camera and the family camera when I want to go out and take some photos. Now, let's take a brief moment to talk about the camera updates. It's no secret in the Sony world that Sony seemingly left this camera in the dust when it comes to the updates. And I think that's partially because of the push for the FX3 and a way to get more sales over to the FX3 line. They're the same sensor in different bodies, but Sony updated the FX3 to include things like DCI 4K and focus breathing compensation. It's pretty sad, right? No updates for the A7S to include those. However, in Tuesday's announcement of the Sony A9 III, at the very end of the presentation, they dropped a little nugget in there where they said that they would be bringing all of these updates over to the A7S III in early 2024. So essentially, this camera is about to get a lot better with software updates from Sony coming in the near future. Keep that in mind when purchasing it. It'll only get better from here. Continuing on with the image quality, I've never seen another camera do so well in low light situations. Still to this day, it's crazy how other mirrorless cameras can't compete with the 12,800 native ISO in S-Log3. For example, when shooting a wedding reception and comparing our A7S III footage to FX30 with this APS-C sensor and 2500 native ISO, the A7S blows that image out of the water in low light every single time. And same with the A7 IV with this crop sensor in slow motion and 2500 native ISO. The Sony A7S III still blows that camera out of the water too. Shooting in low light situations is so common for me shooting live events and weddings. There will always be an uncontrollable light in dark situations that your client expects you to deliver in, and the A7S III delivers every single time. The only mirrorless camera that can currently compete is the new Sony ZV-E1 and the FX3. And the ZV-E1's other issues and overall cheaper feel and operation, I would rather show up with an A7S III every single time. It's actually a good point now that I think about it. With all these questions I've been getting about the ZV-E1 and its similar sensor to the A7S and FX3, just buy a used A7S III instead and you'll be far better off for professional settings than purchasing a brand new ZV-E1. It makes sense now that I think of it that way. The used A7S is about the same price as a new ZV-E1. So I know earlier I said that we can't expect a new version of this camera anytime soon, but a boy still has his wishes. What I'd love to see from an A7S III or an FX3 Mark II is simple. Give me the same phenomenal low light capability, give me global shutter, and give me built-in ND filters in a small body. That's it. Those are my 3 wishes for the new generation. Now, I know that we've got a long way to go on the ND filters since in-body image stabilization with internal ND was just introduced on the new $25,000 Sony Brano, and global shutter in a mirrorless body was just introduced on the A9 III this week. But I definitely believe the next few years that is where we'll see cameras heading. Internal NDs with in-body image stabilization and global shutter on every image sensor. One day soon. But today is not that day, and therefore today, the A7S III still reigns king of the cameras. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and keep in mind, if you're not subscribed, we're on a mission here to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2023, and I think we can do it. There's just 52 days left in the year, and if we do some quick math, that means we just need 12 subscribers per day added to reach my goal. So hit that button, help a fellow videographer out, pay me in exposure. I'll see you on the next one.